She thought she knew the man she married. For 47 years, Claire Morrison built a life beside Richard, sharing dinners, memories, and heartbreak over their missing son. But when the FBI knocked on their door nearly half a century later, what they dug up beneath the garage shattered everything. It wasn't just a cold case, it was a buried truth. A father's deadly secret, a mother's worst nightmare, and a son who never truly left home. What happens when love becomes a lie and the killer sleeps beside you for decades? Stay with this story, because the final truth is colder than the concrete he was buried under. Claire Morrison sat quietly at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm coffee. The smell of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, the remnants of a morning routine that had remained the same for decades. She gazed out of the window, where the small rural Ohio town stretched out in its peaceful, almost idyllic quiet. Birds chirped outside, and the rustle of leaves filled the air. Yet the tranquility was in stark contrast to the storm inside her heart. 47 years of marriage to Richard had taught Claire many things, but the most enduring lesson was that silence, more than words, often spoke the loudest. It had been 47 years since the day their son Daniel had disappeared without a trace. A teenage boy of 18, barely a week from his high school graduation, was gone. The police, after a cursory investigation, had brushed it off as a runaway case. Teens do this, they told her. He'll turn up. But he didn't. Claire didn't believe it, not for a second. No matter how many times Richard tried to reassure her, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, that kept Claire awake at night. She would lie in bed, her heart racing, imagining the worst. It wasn't just that Daniel had left, it was the eerie silence that followed, the empty room, the unanswered calls, the not knowing. And Richard, her husband, the man who had sworn he would never lie to her, had become a stone wall. He didn't cry, he didn't shout, he didn't even seem to grieve. He simply shut down. Over the years he had buried himself in work, in books, in crossword puzzles, anything to avoid discussing their missing son. Claire tried to prod him. She tried to ask him questions, but every time Richard would shut her down with that same calm, cold voice. "He's gone, Claire. Let it go." But she couldn't, and she didn't. Over the years, Claire had turned their home into a sanctuary of warmth and kindness. She took in stray animals, she volunteered at the church, and she made sure the neighbors always had fresh cookies when they needed them. But beneath that soft exterior, her heart remained torn. She never let go of Daniel. Every birthday, every holiday, she clung to the hope that he would walk through that door, that this was all just some sick misunderstanding. Then one morning, just as Claire had finished putting her apron on and was heading out to the garden, a white unmarked van pulled into their gravel driveway. The tires crunched loudly on the stones, and Claire's heart skipped a beat. The agents were dressed in windbreakers, their faces unreadable. They moved quickly, their footsteps deliberate as they approached her. Without introducing themselves, one of them said, "Ma'am, we need to speak with your husband." Claire's first instinct was confusion, followed by panic. "What's this about?" she asked. But the agent simply repeated the request, his voice flat. "Ma'am, please." Claire felt a knot form in her stomach. Something in the air felt wrong. As the agents approached the house, Claire watched Richard slowly stand from his favorite armchair by the window. His face was paler than usual, his expression distant. He didn't say a word as he walked past her, but she saw it. The trembling in his hands, the way his eyes flickered to hers with an expression of guilt and fear, before he turned and disappeared into the house. The FBI had arrived, and Richard wasn't about to face them with his usual stoic calm. For the first time in 47 years, Claire felt like she was on the outside looking in. The man she had trusted, the man who had sworn to protect her, was hiding something terrible. She had always known there was more to the story, something unspoken, buried beneath the years of silence and grief. But she never imagined it would come to this. In the stillness of the house, with the FBI agents now speaking in hushed tones inside, Claire could only wait. She had waited for Daniel's return all these years. But this was something different. This was the truth. And Claire was about to uncover a secret her husband had carried for almost 5 decades. The garage was always Richard's domain. Built 2 years after Daniel vanished, it was his personal project. Concrete, wood, and sweat poured into something that didn't seem urgent at the time. Claire remembered thinking it was odd. Why did he suddenly want to rebuild the garage? The old one was fine, but Richard insisted. "I need the space," he had said. Something productive to focus on. She believed him. After all, grief took people down strange roads. She watched him work on it for weeks, alone, barely speaking, pouring slab after slab of concrete with a precision that felt more ritual than repair. Back then, it had seemed like therapy. Now it felt like a cover. The agents moved quickly. Within hours of arriving, they brought in specialized equipment. Ground-penetrating radar swept across the floor of the garage like something out of a science fiction film. Claire stood outside, hugging herself as the wind picked up. It was autumn, the leaves rustling like whispers in the yard. She couldn't hear everything the agents said, but their tones grew urgent, sharper, more direct. Then came the jackhammers. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and relentless, as pieces of the floor that Richard had so carefully laid were broken apart. Neighbors began to gather. A few watched from across the street. Others whispered and pointed from their porches. Then the digging stopped. One of the agents emerged from the garage with a look that drained all color from Claire's world. He approached her slowly, carefully, his words delicate but firm. "Mrs. Morrison, we've found human remains." Time slowed. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she fell to her knees in the driveway. Her hands went to her face, muffling a scream that had been held back for 47 long, aching years. The agent knelt beside her, offering comfort she couldn't feel. Her eyes locked on the garage. She could barely breathe. Inside, the agents uncovered what had once been a teenage boy. The bones told a silent story of violence, of tragedy, of betrayal. Dental records confirmed it. Daniel Morrison. Claire couldn't bring herself to look at the photographs they gently offered to show her for verification. She didn't need them. A mother knows. She had always known, even if she couldn't admit it to herself. The body was under their home this entire time. While she cooked dinner, decorated Christmas trees, handed Richard his morning coffee, their son had been resting beneath cold cement, and the man she trusted most had put him there. Richard didn't resist arrest. As agents read him his rights, he sat motionless on the same kitchen chair he always used, staring at nothing. His only words were, "It was an accident," over and over again. Claire watched him, unable to speak, unable to cry anymore. There was no emotion in his voice, just resignation. He looked smaller now, not the man who built homes and carried her through hard times. He looked like a coward, and Claire felt sick to her stomach. She wanted to scream, to strike him, to force the truth out of him. But all she could do was whisper, "Why?" Her voice broke as she said it, barely audible. The answer came slowly in the form of a hidden journal, found locked away in Richard's basement toolbox. Its pages held entries from the time Daniel disappeared. He wrote about a fight, Daniel confronting him, threatening to expose something, an affair maybe, or some hidden crime. The journal was vague, rambling, the words disturbed. He mentioned a hammer, panic, a sudden blow. He fell. One entry read, "I didn't mean to." Another read, "Couldn't let Claire find out, couldn't let it destroy her." Claire read the journal with trembling hands, unable to believe what she saw. She thought about the day Daniel vanished, about Richard's calm composure, about how quickly he suggested not involving the press. She realized she had spent nearly 5 decades sleeping next to a murderer. Every meal they shared, every church service they sat through side by side, every quiet evening by the fireplace, they were illusions built on a lie. And Daniel, Her sweet boy with the shy smile and love for science. He had died in fear, and no one came for him. Claire had been waiting for his return, while his body lay buried just yards away. It was enough to shatter something deep inside her, not just her heart, her entire reality. The courtroom buzzed with whispers the day the trial began. Locals packed the benches, some out of shock, others for gossip, and many because they had known the Morrisons for years. Claire entered quietly, flanked by officers who offered her support, though she refused to be treated like a fragile widow. Her spine was straight, her eyes hollow but sharp. She had spent months preparing to face Richard in court. Now, sitting just feet from him, the weight of betrayal pressed on her like 1,000 bricks. He sat there in an orange jumpsuit, hands folded, head bowed, not in remorse but in retreat, like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. Prosecutors opened with a timeline, detailing the years of silence, the sudden construction of the garage, the journal entries, the dental matches, and the cold, brutal fact that Daniel had never left home. They painted Richard as a man who killed to preserve his own secrets, then lived half a century in denial. This wasn't an accident, one attorney said. This was a man who planned, buried, and kept the truth hidden while the world moved on. The defense clung to the claim of panic, of one fatal moment, but the facts didn't bend. Daniel had been hit with enough force to crush bone. His body was hidden, not reported. The concrete was poured. The lie was maintained. Claire took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. For years, she said, I lived with a man who told me our son had abandoned us. Every birthday, every holiday, I set a place for him in my heart, and Richard let me. He watched me cry. He held me when I blamed myself. And all along, he knew. Her voice cracked, but she continued. I loved him. I defended him. I told people he was just grieving in his own way. But now I know, he wasn't grieving. He was covering up a murder of our child. Tears slipped down her cheek, but she didn't stop. I hope he remembers my face every night, for the rest of his life. Because I will never forget his. When the verdict was read, guilty of second-degree murder, obstruction, and unlawful concealment, the room exhaled. Richard showed no reaction, no apology, no breakdown. Claire simply stood and walked out. She didn't wait to watch them take him away. She didn't want to see his eyes again. She stepped into the sunlight, blinking hard, breathing in the air like it was her first time seeing the world without a filter of lies. The weight hadn't lifted, but the silence had shattered. The truth, though cruel, had finally come. Months passed. Claire tore down the garage. She hired a crew to break every slab of concrete, to haul away every brick her husband had laid over the crime. In its place, she planted a garden, a mix of roses, lilies, and sunflowers. A stone sat in the center, engraved with Daniel's name, and the words, "You were always here." On what would have been his 65th birthday, she stood in the garden, holding a photo of him, her only child. She whispered stories to the wind, her fingers brushing the petals like they were strands of his hair. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she said softly. "I'm sorry you were alone." The story captured the nation. News outlets ran specials. True crime documentaries reached out. But Claire didn't care about fame or platforms. What mattered to her was justice, and the message that sometimes, even the people who share your bed can be strangers. She began speaking at conferences for families of missing persons, telling them to trust their gut, to never stop asking questions. Silence doesn't mean peace, she would say. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream for help. And in that small town in Ohio, where neighbors still drove by slowly and whispered her name, Claire Morrison found something close to peace, not from closure, but from courage, from the choice to face the darkest truth of her life and still rise. She had been a mother, a wife, a widow, and now, finally, a voice for Daniel, A voice for every mother, still waiting, still wondering, still listening to the silence behind the walls.